On this episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, join me as I discuss the brutal murders of backpackers in the Belangolo State Forest at the hands of a sadistic serial killer. Coming up right after this. Hello, my true crime friends. Welcome to another episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans. I'm your host, Belinda Brady, and welcome everybody. Welcome to this episode, and it is actually episode number 40. My goodness, 40 episodes of talking about crime. How good is that? And thank you for coming along with me. I absolutely love you all for it. Thank you. Now, quick catch up to anyone who's new. I talk about true Australian murders while I'm drinking coffee. And as usual for me, I am drinking my black coffee with a syrup. I've got a mocha syrup. I'm finding it very hard to find syrups here in Australia that aren't just caramel or vanilla. So I've got mocha, and it is actually cold enough. The weather's come down a bit. It's summer here, so the weather's come down a bit for me to actually want to have a coffee. So that's always a bonus. And as per usual, as I say with every episode, I will have a quick look at where you guys are listening to me from. And I've got listeners joining me from Greece. I love that. I'm dying to go to Greece. It looks amazing, looks so beautiful. Turkey, France, and Singapore. And of course, I've still got the US, New Zealand, and Australia in there. And I've also got, I think I mentioned Ireland as well. And I love that. I was in Ireland last year, fell in love with the place. Absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much, guys. I love seeing where you're listening to me from. It's really, really cool. Now, as always, if you want, you can subscribe to me. If you subscribe, you get bonus ghost stories episodes. If you think our killers are nasty, wait until you meet our ghosts. And you can just subscribe to help a girl out. I am a one-woman podcast. I research, edit, do it all myself. And I think sometimes that is glaringly obvious, but I do it because I love it. And I love talking about this stuff with you guys. So thank you for listening. And if you feel like buying me a coffee, giving me a shout out, giving me a subscription, I'm here for it. Okay, now before I get stuck into anything, I will give you my sources for this episode, which are www.parliamentnewsouthwales.gov.au, theguardian.com, murderpedia.org, smh.com.au, and pedestrian.tv. Now, heads up, this episode does contain disturbing and graphic violence. It does talk about it. So if that is a trigger for you, please bear that in mind. Okay, and let's just get stuck right into it, hey? Ivan Milat, the backpacker murderer. Now, traveling is a wonderful way to see the world and experience new things and cultures. And on any given day, millions of us are traveling around the world and doing just that. And for most of us, we come home safe, possibly a little poorer, possibly a little heavier from all our overindulging we've done on holidays, but we get home, we're safe, we tell our family and friends of our adventures, and we start planning for our next one. But sometimes when you're traveling, you run into misfortunes such as having your luggage stolen, which has happened to me in Las Vegas, or food poisoning, or sometimes you cross paths with pure evil and you don't come home at all. And this is what happened to 7 backpackers from all over the world who decided to explore Australia like many before them and many after them. And unfortunately, they crossed paths with pure evil. And that evil was a man called Ivan Milat. Ivan Milat was born on the 27th of December 1945. He was the 5th child of 14 and one of 10 sons. Now, his dad migrated to Australia from Croatia after the First World War, and he worked on the Sydney wharves while Ivan's mum stayed home and cared for the kids. Now, Ivan's dad eventually started a tomato plantation in Western Sydney, and all his boys, all 10 of them, worked there. Now, neighbours described the Milats as ignorant of other people's cultures or experiences and had no interest in learning about their neighbours. They kept to themselves. And as the family grew, trouble started to find them. Now, the boys were not great boys. They were bad eggs. They were into petty theft and break-ins, and 7 out of the 10 brothers became well known to the police, Ivan being one of them. During the 60s, Ivan did stints in jail for break-and-enters and burglary, and he actually shot a man called Neville Knight in the spine, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down in an attempted robbery. Now, Ivan was never caught for this, and another man was falsely imprisoned for the crime, but Ivan later told a friend that it was him. He also had affairs with his brother's girlfriends at the same time. So he was, I guess, hooking up with 2 girls who were both going out with his brothers. So, it was pretty clear from the offset that Ivan only cared about Ivan, and as he got older, so did the severity of his crimes. In the 1970s, his crimes increased with severity when he picked up 2 hitchhikers, produced a knife and raped one, telling her, "I'm going to kill you. You won't scream when I cut your throats, will you?" One of the girls asked him if he had done this before, to which he replied yes, and he even told them he had a kit in the car which had knives and ropes if the opportunity to kidnap and rape somebody arose. Now, these terrified girls managed to escape, and Ivan this time was charged but not convicted, and managed to go into hiding from 1971 to 1974 when he was finally captured. Now, he went to jail where he bragged to cellmates about his previous rapes and murders, and he admitted to killing both boys and girls, and he said to his roommate, his cellmates, he had buried them in bushland near the Sydney suburb of Liverpool. Ivan was a keen hunter and bragged to friends about his likeness for violence, even telling one how to turn a person into a head on a stick by stabbing them in the spine. And in 1983, at the age of 38, he married a 16-year-old who was pregnant to his cousin. The couple went on to have a child of their own, but the girl left a few years later due to domestic violence. It was around this time that Ivan started work as a highway construction worker. And it was around this time that Ivan was, very heavily into his hunting. And in his off time, he liked to ride his motorbike and go out hunting on his own. So he moved around a fair bit with his road construction job and liked hunting. I think we all know where I'm going with this. So on the 30th of December 1989, Deborah Everest, who was 19, and James Gibson, who was also 19, left Melbourne, Victoria, making their way to Sydney, New South Wales. They stayed at a backpackers hostel in an inner city suburb. The next day, the couple made their way to Confest, which was an alternate lifestyle festival, with plans to hitchhike to Albury in New South Wales. They never made it. And the next day, a bushwalker found James's camera on the side of the road at Galston Gorge in northern Sydney. Now, this person took the camera home, but only reported the find when James's backpack was found in the same area a month later, and it was linked to a missing persons report that had been made about the two, who just seemingly got up and vanished into thin air. On the 20th of January 1991, German-born Simone Schmindel, who was 20 at the time, set off to hitchhike from Sydney to Melbourne, where she planned to meet her mother, who was flying in from Germany to join her daughter on a camping holiday. Her friends warned her against hitchhiking there, but she was determined to do it. She was last seen at a train station in Western Sydney trying to hitch a ride. She never made it to Melbourne, and like Deborah and James before her, she too seemingly vanished into thin air. On the 26th of December of the same year, so in 1991, German backpackers Gabor Neugebauer, and I hope I have said that correctly, who was 21, and Anja Habschild, 20, left a backpackers hostel in King's Cross, which is a Sydney suburb, and attempted to hitchhike to Adelaide and then on to Darwin, which is quite a feat because not only are they different states, but they're different sides of different parts of the country. Like Darwin is north and Adelaide is south. So you're trying to hitch to total opposite ends of the country. They too seemingly vanished into thin air. On the 18th of April 1992, British backpackers Joanne Walters, who was 22, and Carolyn Clark, 21, also left King's Cross to hitch around Australia together. They had planned on going to Victoria to fruit pick, which was not uncommon for backpackers to do. They earned a bit of money, cash in hand, and they got as far as Bulli, which is a few hours near Wollongong, where they asked around for directions to the Hume Highway, which is a main highway that connects New South Wales and Victoria. The girls were never seen again, and they never made it to their destination. Now, at the time, not a great deal was thought about this. You know, the backpackers going off the grid, it happens all the time. People come here, they go into a foreign country, decide, hey, I like it, and they kind of go off the grid. It happens. Sometimes they just decide to wander off. But when Joanne and Caroline went missing, a ripple went through the media, and the families of the missing said, no, this is not like our girls. And it didn't take long for all these missing backpackers cases to be linked. You know, it can't be just a coincidence that these young people were trying to hitch and they never made it to where they were meant to be, and they just disappeared. But with no bodies or no suspects, it was just speculation. Missing person reports had been filed for all the missing backpackers, and the families were absolutely determined to find their loved ones. And for some of the missing, years went by with nothing. No leads, no sightings, nothing, until the morning of the 19th of September 1992. Ken Seeley was meeting his orientation club for their weekly run in the beautiful Belanglo State Forest. Now, Belanglo is a planted forest in New South Wales and is located south of Berrima in the Southern Highlands. It is near the Hume Highway, which is the main artery between Sydney and Canberra and Victoria. It is a main artery, and it's a beautiful forest. And the first radiata pines were planted there in 1919. It is a very beautiful forest. Now, on this September Saturday, the club had organised a training day, and by early afternoon, they were deep in the forest. They were close to an area called Executioner's Drop, which was named for its sheer fall into a deep gorge, and they started taking bearings. Approaching a large boulder that Ken had seen off in the distance, he began to smell something bad. which got more intense the closer he got, and he chalked it up to being an animal carcass. There's animals all through the forest. It's not unusual to find a dead one. He was about to move on when his running partner Keith came over and asked him if he could smell that smell. Now the two men approached the western side of the boulder, and under a pile of debris and sticks, they saw what they thought was a bone and some hair. Now they still weren't sure of what they were looking at until they saw part of a black t-shirt. They then walked around the boulder and found the heel of a shoe sticking out from a pile of brush. They took note of their location and went back to their club, back to their club members, where they called emergency services, who hung up on them and said it wasn't an emergency. After several phone calls, Ken was finally put through to the police at Barrel Police Station, and he told them, "I found a body in the Belangolo State Forest." With the sun fading, because it was September, it's still very early spring day, so the sun does go down early. Police arrived and realised, yes, a body had been found and a crime scene was set up. The day after, police found a second body covered by a log. The bodies were confirmed to be that of Carolyn Clark and Joanne Walters, the two backpackers who had gone missing in April of that year. Now, police notified Carolyn's mother in England and told her the bad news, and Joanne's parents, Ray and Jill, were actually in Australia desperately trying to find their daughter, and they were tracked down in Sydney and given the bad news. Both Joanne and Caroline had been brutally murdered. Caroline had been shot 10 times in the head while blindfolded and stabbed in the chest. And Joanne had been stabbed 21 times in the back, 14 times in the chest, and one blow severed her spine. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was a brutal murder, and it was cruel. Cigarette butts, a fireplace, and a .22 caliber bullet cartridges were found around the scene. Autopsies revealed that the knife used on the girls was most likely a Bowie knife, and whoever had done this had stabbed Joanna so viciously, her wounds to her back would have left her completely helpless. The police scanned the area with a fine-tooth comb, finding nothing, and they told the media that they were confident they wouldn't find any other bodies. We now know how wrong they were, but it would be a year before Belangolo gave up all her secrets. On the 5th of October 1993, Bruce Pryor was out collecting firewood in the forest, a job he'd done many times before, and the official search for any more backpackers had been called off by this stage, and the investigation was ongoing, but it kind of had faded away into the background. Now, he went on his usual track on this day, but for some reason, he decided to turn off onto a smaller track, which was called the Maurice Fire Trail, and came to a T section where he decided to turn left. And he turned left onto a track that he'd never been on before. He got out of his car, walked around, and saw a bone at his foot. He thought it might have been a kangaroo bone. So he walked further ahead, going up an incline. And as he was going to turn around and leave, he caught a flash of white, sort of underneath some branches and stuff. So he parted the tangled undergrowth that the white was under, and he found the source. It was a human skull. And you got to remember, guys, this was before mobile phones were in everyone's handbags and back pockets like they are now. So I think the closest thing we had to them was car phones, and not everybody had those. Bruce panicked. He didn't know what to do. He didn't want to leave the skull there. He didn't want to not know where he was at. So he grabbed the skull. And he also didn't think anyone would actually believe him because police were like, no, there's no more bodies here. So he grabbed the skull, wrapped it in a cloth and put it in his car and took off. He drove out to the forest, and on the way he came across another man and asked if he had a phone he could use, which he did. And Bruce called Barrel Police Station and said, I found parts of a skeleton in Belangolo Forest. And the police were kind of a bit casual about it, like, oh, okay, whatever. So they came out, and after being showed the very human skull that he had found, they quickly changed their tune. And a search was conducted and 2 bodies were found. 2 more bodies were found, but they were skeletal. Now, media got wind of this, and speculation about who the skull belonged to, who the bodies belonged to, was rife. And dental records and bones were examined, and it was determined that the bodies were that of James Gibson and Deborah Everest, who had gone missing in 1989. James had been stabbed 8 times. 1 wound to his upper spine would have caused paralysis, and he had been stabbed in the heart and lungs. Deborah had been beaten so savagely. Her skull was fractured and her jaw was broken. There were knife marks on her forehead, and her back too had been stabbed. Just like Joanne and Caroline, their deaths had been cruel and brutal. A task force was set up at this stage. This was not just, a random killing. This was the work of something much more sinister. A task force was set up, and the gun casings from the Walters Clark scene were tested and found to have belonged to a Ruger rifle, and the task of finding the owner of this rifle began. Lists of all residents in the area who were registered with this kind of gun was contacted, and their weapons were examined. At this point, police didn't have a red-hot suspect, but it wouldn't be long before one family name kept being repeated. Searchers were still searching the forest, and on the 1st of November 1993, a skeleton was found in a clearing along a fire trail. It appeared to be that of a female, and a purple headband was found on her skull. Dental records ID'd the body as that of Simone Schmidl, who went missing while hitchhiking in 1991. She had been stabbed in the front and back, and her spinal cord had been completely severed. Simone's family, who were a world away in Germany, heard the awful, awful news about their daughter on the radio. Now, our police had told German police, please let her know we have found her daughter, but the German police failed to pass this on. And they still had not formally told Simone's mother, hey, they found your daughter, until 2 weeks after Simone's remains had been flown back home to Germany and buried. But the Belangolo State Forest had 2 more people it had to give up. And on the 4th of November, 3 days after Simone was found, on the 4th of November 1993, 2 bodies were found in shallow graves. 1 body was missing its head, which has never been found. The bodies were eventually ID'd as Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anja Habschild, who had been missing since 1991. Anja's head had been severed from her body with either a machete or a sword, and the angle of the cut indicated she had been in a kneeling position when she had been killed. Gabor had been gagged and shot in the head 6 times, and bullets were eventually found at their burial site. Over 90 scattered, fired bullet cases at that scene where they died. 90. And they had all come from the same gun. Again, the victims before, they would have died a horrible and scary and terrifying and brutal death. And police realized that they had a serial killer on their hands, but he was sadistic and he was cruel and he was unpredictable, and there was no rhyme or reason as to why he picked his victims. Yes, he seemed to go after the backpackers, but it didn't matter if they were men or women. They also knew that he was calculated, and they also knew he was very confident. Police offered a reward of $500,000 on any leads, and they picked through each suspect until they narrowed it down to 32 people. But soon, very soon, it would be shortened to one. And they'd already had a few whispers about this man. A few people had already come forward saying, we're a bit sus about this man or this man's family. But it wasn't until they heard about a man called Paul Onions and his escape from certain death that they really, really knew they had to find. They had their man. Now, Paul Onions had heard about the murders on the news. He was in the UK. He lived in the UK. Heard about the murders on the news and realised, shit, the man who tried to kidnap me all those years ago when I was backpacking around Australia might be the guy that they're looking for. On the 25th of January 1990, Paul had been backpacking around Australia when he decided he was going to hitch a ride from Liverpool Station. Liverpool is a Western Sydney suburb. Now, he accepted a ride from a muscly, well-built, stocky, confident man who identified himself as Bill. Bill told Paul he could take him as far as Casula, and Paul happily accepted. Now, Paul's plan was to fruit pick so he could earn some extra cash and keep travelling around Australia. Now, Bill had a four-wheel drive and a distinctive moustache. And as they drove, Bill asked Paul questions like, where are you from? When are you due back? And does anyone know you are here? Bill told him he worked on the roads and he was divorced. Now, after about an hour, Bill's demeanour began to change and he started to go on rants about gooks, which is racist slang for Asians, and pommies, which is what Australians call Brits. Don't ask us why. I don't know why. It's just something between us and the Brits. And then he completely shut down. By mid-afternoon, Paul noticed Bill kept looking in his rearview mirror and he was fiddling with the radio. Now, Paul's gut instinct started to tell him something was really off, and Bill then announced he was going to pull over and get some cassette tapes from the back of the car. And it was then that Paul noticed there were actually cassette tapes in the car's console, so he didn't need to go to the back of the car. Bill pulled over and got out of the car, and Paul decided to get out too. Bill yelled at him to get back into the car, so Paul did. Bill jumped in the driver's seat next to Paul, and he pulled out a large black gun from under his seat and pointed it at Paul, telling him it was a robbery and to put his seatbelt back on. He then reached back under his seat and pulled out some rope. For a split second, terrified out of his mind, Paul started to obey and started to go to put his seatbelt back on, but he changed his mind and, scared out of his mind in a foreign country with some psycho pointing a gun at you, he thought, fuck it, I'm going to run. So he did. He started to run. He got out of that car and started to run. He heard Bill yelling behind him, stop or I'll shoot. Panicked, Paul ran into the middle of the road, into oncoming traffic where some cars swerved to avoid him. Now, Paul looked back and expected to see Bill chasing him, but instead he saw him standing by the car, smiling and yelling, get back here, you. Paul managed to flag down a van, and as it slowed, he ran to the grass strip dividing the lanes on the road, and it was then that Bill was on him, tackled Paul to the ground, tackled him by his heels, tackled him to the ground. Now, Paul managed to break free and lunged at the van, lunged at him, screaming for his life. Inside the van was a terrified local woman called Joanne Berry, and she slammed on the brakes. Paul leapt inside her van, screaming, "He's got a gun, help me." And she took off. But she had her 4 kids in the car and her sister. And she was worried about, my God, what have I invited into my car? What is going on? And she was about to stop and tell him to get out. But seeing this young man's terrified face, she decided to take him to the nearest police station instead. That decision, no doubt, saved Paul's life. They went to Bowral Police Station, where Paul told police everything, and the police put out a circulation to watch out for this mysterious Bill, but with no rego, there was no real chance of finding him. So, life goes on. Paul had to go to the British Commission in Sydney to get a new passport because he'd left everything in the car when he fled for his life. And someone there felt really sorry for him, so she gave him some money to help him out. He stayed in Australia for a bit, but he returned to England and tried to put that horrible experience behind him. And when he heard of bodies being found near where he was nearly abducted, he knew he had to tell the police his story again. So he did. He called the special hotline that had been set up for any tips, and he told an officer of his story. The officer took note, thanked him, and hung up. Now, Joanne Berry, the woman who rescued Paul, also made a call to the hotline. And again, she was thanked. But another woman also made a call saying she didn't know if she could help, but she knew of a man who drove a 4-wheel drive, owned a lot of guns, liked hunting, and was very suspicious. His name was Ivan Milat. Now, the task force that had been set up to find this serial killer agreed that Paul's story was a strong one, and that Milat was a real possible suspect. On the 6th of February 1994, they interviewed Joanne Berry, who repeated her story with no differing of her story of rescuing Paul Onions, and they went through the records and found his occurrence report, which was made when he reported it to Bowral Police all those years ago. It had never been followed up, and 5 of the 7 backpackers killed had been murdered after he was nearly abducted and after he had made that report. So it took him calling that hotline to say, "Hey, this happened to me," for the police to go, "All right, let's have a look at this," and actually go back and find, shit, he did actually report this way back. Who knows? If it had been followed up, who knows if those other 5 people would have been killed? We'll never know. They pulled Ivan's criminal records, and my, oh my, what a record it was. They found he had been involved in armed hold-ups, sexual assault, and abduction, and this was in the 70s. Further investigation revealed he had bad form as far back as the 60s, because he was getting in trouble for break and enters then. And after being charged with rape in 1971, he fled to New Zealand, but returned to Australia after getting in trouble over there. He was arrested when he returned, but he beat the rape charge. Everywhere this man went, something bad happened. Now, police were absolutely convinced they had found their serial killer. Ivan was put under surveillance in February of 1994. Meanwhile, police got in contact with Paul Onions in the UK and arranged for him to be brought out to Australia, to Sydney, Australia, so they could interview him. He arrived on the 2nd of May 1994, and on the 5th of May, he was shown 13 photos of suspects who could have been his attacker that horrible day. He identified picture 4 as Billy. The picture, Billy, was really Ivan Milat. The police had enough to charge him at least with the attempted abduction of Paul, and on the 22nd of May at 6:30 a.m. in the morning, heavily armed, fully decked out in bulletproof vests and SWAT gear, police swarmed Ivan's house. He was there with his girlfriend, and after some negotiations, they both agreed to come out, but it appeared that Ivan wasn't really taking them seriously. He didn't think it was legit, and they thought it was a work friend having a laugh. But him and his girlfriend eventually did come out together at 6:48 a.m., some 10 minutes after the police first arrived, and they laid on the ground as directed, and he was arrested. When told about Paul and the backpackers and how the police suspected his involvement, he replied, "I don't know what you're talking about." Now, the police started a search of the house, and what they found was mind-blowing. If there was any doubt that Milat was their guy, it disappeared after what they found in his house. They found 38.22 caliber bullets, which he explained as he uses to go shooting. Postcards addressed to someone called Bill. New Zealand currency. Indonesian currency, which is odd because Ivan had never been there. But two of the murdered backpackers, Gabor and Anja, had been to Indonesia just before they arrived in Australia. 2 rolls of black electrical tape. A driver's license with Ivan's picture, but the name on it read Michael Gordon Milat. A camouflage knife, 4 boxes of .22 caliber bullets, a broken gun barrel, more ammo for various guns, a green water bottle, and a pouch similar to one owned by Simone Schmidl. That was in his bedroom. In his sister's bedroom, who also shared the house with Ivan, they found a green sleeping bag that looked identical to one owned by Deborah Everest, and another one that looked similar to one owned by Simone Schmidl. They found a photo of his girlfriend wearing a green and white striped Benetton shirt owned by Carolyn Clark, and they found a camping cooking set owned by Simone Schmidl in a hallway cupboard. A camera that belonged to Carolyn Clark was found, and a fully loaded automatic Browning pistol was found under a laundry basket. Ivan had stashed things in several of his family's properties, and police, upon further searching, found more guns, crossbows, and camping gear belonging to the dead backpackers. And in Ivan's mother's house, police found a sword in the cupboard. Ballistics matched the bullets found in his rooms to the casings found in Belangolo State Forest where the victims had been found. Ivan was their man. He was the backpacker serial killer. Ivan Robert Marco Milat was charged with the 7 murders of the backpackers, and he was committed to stand trial. Ivan dismissed his first lawyer, who told him to plead guilty, and after his new lawyer finally agreed on a pay rate because legal aid was going to pay for this lawyer, a date for the trial was finally set. Now, Ivan's brothers Richard and Walter were charged in relation to having weapons, drugs, and stolen items on their properties. All eyes were on Ivan, and he stood trial on the 26th of March 1996 in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, Sydney, and he was confident he would be found innocent. It was and still is one of the biggest murder trials in Australia's criminal history, and all eyes of the world, all media was on it. Families of the deceased had made the trek to Sydney to see their loved one's killer brought to justice, and one key witness, Paul Onions, was the first to take the stand. Now, Milat stared him down, but Paul stood strong, and he did an amazing job of telling the court and the jury of what happened to him that day. The parents of each victim took the stand and told the court and the jury of the impact of the murder of their loved ones has had on their lives. And 365 exhibits and hundreds of photos were described in detail. It would have been harrowing for those families to go through. Ivan still maintains his innocence, though, and tried to pin it on his brothers Richard and Walter, who were, like I said, already facing charges for having stolen items on their properties. He said that Richard and Walter were the real killers, and they had planted all those items at his house to frame him. It wasn't him, it was his brothers. No one was buying it. And all up, 145 witnesses were called, and the trial ran for 12 weeks. The jury took 3 days to decide before they found Ivan Milat guilty of all charges on the 27th of July, 1996. He was sentenced to life in prison, a life sentence for each of the 7 lives he took, plus a further 6 years for the attack on Paul Onions. When asked if he had any words, he replied, "I'm not guilty of it. That's all I have to say." Ivan was sent to maximum security jail in Maitland Jail, and really was not the ideal prisoner, not a model prisoner, not that we would expect him to be. He's been attacked by other prisoners. He tried to escape with another inmate but failed. He appealed his ruling but was refused. In January 2009, he cut off his pinky finger with a plastic knife with the intention of sending it to the High Court to force an appeal. He swallowed razor blades, staples, and other objects in an attempt to self-harm, and went on a 9-day hunger strike because he wanted a PlayStation 3 in his cell. The man was an absolute psycho. In May 2019, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and was given treatment at a Sydney hospital. And he was admitted in October of 2019, but no information about his condition was forthcoming. On the 27th of October 2019, Ivan Milat died from esophageal and stomach cancer. The cancer had spread to his stomach in the hospital wing of Long Bay Correctional Centre. He was 74. Even in death, he was entitled and difficult, where he had written a letter before he died to the New South Wales government asking the taxpayer to cover his funeral expenses, and it was denied. The money was taken from his prison account instead. Now, in the days on his deathbed, police were advised that he was close to dying, and police visited him every day in the hope that he would give them a deathbed confession of more victims, but he never did. He did apparently confess to his mother that he was the backpacker murderer, despite stating his innocence in public. So apparently he told his mum, yeah, it was me, despite saying in public and to the police, no, it wasn't me. Now, Ivan Milat is the main suspect in at least 3 other disappearances and murders, but the number could easily be double or triple that. He is the suspect in so many missing women, missing hitchhiker cases from the 70s through to before he was arrested. It is so hard to say. It's so hard to gauge a number of how many he possibly could be involved in. And his work as a road worker and his ability to move around from site to site relatively unseen, unknown, would have been a great advantage for him. Now, reporters once found his brother Boris, who was in hiding from his family, and Boris told the media, "All my brothers are capable of extreme violence given the right time and place individually. The things I can tell you are much worse than what Ivan's meant to have done. Everywhere he's worked, people have disappeared. I know where he's been." He also went on to say that he thinks that Ivan is responsible for at least 28 murders. 28. There has also been claims that he worked with his brothers or he worked with another partner, but that hasn't been proven, and Ivan always maintained his family was not involved in the murders. Now, there are people, this is a decision, this is a opinion, I guess, that divides people. People believe he worked either with a partner or he worked with a brother or brothers or he worked on his own. You're either one or the other with him, and I believe he worked on his own. And I know people who believe he worked with a partner, but I would like to think if he did work with a partner, that partner would have been brought to justice by now. Now, Milat will be the centre of an inquest due mid this year to look into the murder of a pregnant 20-year-old woman by the name of Karen Rowland, who went missing in 1971 on her way to a party in Canberra. Many believe she might have been Ivan's first victim. Now, some members of Ivan's family, some surviving members of his family, have slammed this move, saying they are vilifying him with no real proof and that he was framed for the backpacker murders. Again, we don't know who would have framed him. And again, like I said, I would hope that if he was framed, that person or persons would have been found out by now. It is also worth mentioning that Ivan's great-nephew, Matthew Milat, was found guilty of the 2010 murder of his friend David Ocheloni, who he killed with an axe in the Belangolo State Forest. He was 17 at the time and was sentenced to 43 years in jail and has already lost an appeal. He is not eligible for release until 2040. So there we have it, guys. The story of Ivan Milat, the backpacker serial killer. The man who, I guess we can safely say, was rotten to the core from everything he's done up until his death. Just proves time and time and time again he was not a good person. And he was cruel and he was sadistic, and he did not give a shit what he put his poor victims through as long as he got some kind of gratification from it. Those poor hitchhikers, the ones that we know about, the poor 7 that he was charged with, their last moments would have been so terrifying. So unbelievably terrifying. You're traveling in a country, this nice man has said he's going to give you a lift, and then all of a sudden you're tied up and you're being attacked. I couldn't imagine it. It's almost unthinkable. For the families of the victims, I hope that their memories are a blessing, and I hope that they have been able to move on with their life as best they can and know that everyone, especially us here in Australia, are so sorry about what happened to your loved ones. And if there is anyone out there that does have information about any of the murders that Ivan Milat is suspected of being involved with, please call the police. Let them know what you think. Let them know what you know. You never know, we might be closer to solving a few more murders for some families out there. Okay, guys, that's it. Thank you for listening. You are all absolute rock stars. I love you all for listening to me. Thank you. And until next time, guys, stay safe, stay cool, and stay caffeinated. I will catch you all later.